Grand Admiral Thrawn, blue skin, red eyes, the calculating mastermind who hunts down rebels with terrifying precision. On the surface, he looks like one of Star Wars' greatest villains. But what if he isn't? What if we've been seeing him through the wrong lens this entire time? To the rebellion, Thrawn is a monster. To the Chiss ascendancy, he's a saviour. Every move he makes, every strategy he executes, every sacrifice he demands is driven not by greed or cruelty, but by loyalty. He fights not to dominate, but to protect. And that flips the entire moral script of Star Wars on its head. Because unlike Palpatine, who rules through fear, or Vader, who lashes out in rage, Thrawn's power comes from logic, cold analysis. He studies cultures through their art. He plans campaigns with surgical efficiency. He wins wars not with brute force, but with intellect. That doesn't make him evil. That makes him effective. And effectiveness is a far scarier trait than cruelty. And here's the uncomfortable part. From a certain point of view, Thrawn is right. The unknown regions are full of threats the rest of the galaxy can't even imagine. To the Chiss, survival depends on preemptive action. Thrawn serves the Empire not because he loves tyranny, but because he needs its power to shield his people. That isn't villainy. That's patriotism. This makes him one of the most fascinating characters in Star Wars, because he forces us to admit that morality isn't always black and white. Sometimes the so-called villain is just a man fighting for a cause that doesn't align with ours. Sometimes the red-eyed monster is really the only one who sees what's coming. In this video, we are going to break down why Thrawn is less of a villain and more of a patriot, how his loyalty shapes his choices, and why his story challenges everything we think we know about good and evil in Star Wars. When most people hear the name Thrawn, they think villain, the blue-skinned, red-eyed mastermind who crushes rebels with cold efficiency, the guy who studies art so he can predict entire cultures and then annihilate them. To the rebels, and to the heroes of the original trilogy era, he is absolutely terrifying. But that's only one side of the story, because when you step back and look at his motivations, you see something very different. Thrawn isn't plotting galactic domination for himself. He isn't hungry for power like Palpatine. He's fighting for survival, and not for the Empire's survival either, for the Chiss. The Chiss ascendancy is one of the most fascinating parts of Star Wars canon. Hidden deep in the unknown regions, far beyond the borders of the Republic or the Empire, the Chiss are constantly under threat from enemies most people in the galaxy have never heard of. The ascendancy survives on cunning and preemptive strikes because brute force isn't enough. They need strategy over raw numbers. And Thrawn is their greatest strategist. Every ruthless move he makes in the wider galaxy is rooted in this background. He sees everything through the lens of defending his people. That's why his loyalty looks so different from other Imperial officers. Someone like Tarkin serves the Empire, out of ambition and cruelty. Krennic wants status and recognition. But Thrawn doesn't fit. He isn't even human yet somehow rises to Grand Admiral. That alone should tell us his service is unusual. He uses the Empire not because he believes in its ideology, but because he sees it as a tool. A powerful weapon he can aim at threats in the unknown regions. This is why his character is so unique compared to other so-called villains. Palpatine feeds on fear and manipulation. Vader feeds on rage and grief. Maul feeds on vengeance. But Thrawn feeds on logic. Cold analysis. He looks at the galaxy like a massive equation and works out the answer even if it looks brutal. And because of that, he becomes the kind of enemy who wins not by being stronger, but by being smarter. That's why rebels fear him, and that's why fans are fascinated by him. But again, if you flip the perspective, none of this is villainous. It's patriotic. Thrawn studies cultures not because he's a sadist, but because he wants to understand them well enough to neutralize their threat. He builds fleets not because he enjoys destruction, but because he knows weakness invites annihilation. When you live in the unknown region, survival is a constant calculation. And Thrawn embodies that reality better than anyone. Even his personality reflects this mindset. He doesn't gloat like Tarkin. He doesn't strut like Krennic. He rarely even shows anger. His calm is unnerving because he's not playing games of ego. He's playing for survival. For him, every battle is training for a larger unseen war. The rebels are practice. The Empire is practice. What he really fears are the threats no one else in the galaxy has even imagined yet. This flips the moral lens of Star Wars. To the rebels, Thrawn is a monster. To the Chiss, he's a hero. He's the one willing to play the long game to keep their species alive. That doesn't mean he's warm or compassionate. He sacrifices people without hesitation. But sacrifice doesn't always mean cruelty. Sometimes it means prioritizing the whole over the individual, and in the unknown regions, that's the only way to survive. If you want to see why Thrawn is more patriot than villain, you have to look at how he operates. Because unlike most Imperial commanders, he doesn't waste resources on shows of power or cruelty. He's not blowing up planets just to make a point. He's not ordering mass executions because someone insulted him. Thrawn's every move is calculated, precise. He values efficiency because waste is unacceptable when survival is on the line. Take his obsession with art. It seems like a quirk at first. The villain who collects paintings while conquering worlds. But in reality, it's his way of understanding enemies. To Thrawn, art is the key to culture. And if you understand culture, you can predict strategy. This is why he outsmarts so many foes. Because while they underestimate him as a collector, he's dissecting their very identity. That's not sadism. That's anthropology weaponized. It's brilliant and terrifying all at once. Contrast this with the Empire's usual approach. Tarkin builds the Death Star. Krennic shows it off. Vader intimidates through fear. All blunt instruments. Thrawn doesn't think like that. He prefers surgical strikes and he wants to minimize waste, maximize efficiency, and leave as little chaos as possible. Even when he loses, he learns. Because for him, every battle is information. And information is survival. This is where his patriotism shows most clearly. Thrawn doesn't need glory. He doesn't need people chanting his name. He doesn't even need the Emperor's approval. What he needs is data, strategy, readiness for the greater war in the unknown regions. That's why his loyalty to the Empire is conditional. He doesn't worship Palpatine. He uses him. And that distinction is massive. And you can see the cracks in how other Imperials view him. Many distrust him because he isn't human. Many resent him because he doesn't play political games. But that's exactly what makes him effective. He's not there to climb a ladder. He's there to prepare for what's coming. And in a twisted way that makes him one of the most honest characters in the Empire. Even in defeat, Thrawn shows that long view. When he disappears with Ezra at the end of Rebels, it doesn't feel like the end of a villain. It feels like the repositioning of a strategist. You know he's not gone. You know he's calculating from wherever he is. That's not the behaviour of a tyrant who loses power. That's the behaviour of a general planning for the next phase of survival. What's funny is how much this makes him look like the opposite of Palpatine. Palpatine's vision is domination through fear. Thrawn's vision is survival through preparation. Palpatine builds empires that inevitably collapse. Thrawn builds strategies meant to endure collapse. He's not thinking about 5 years of power. He's thinking about 5 centuries of survival. And that's why fans often root for him, even though he's technically the bad guy. He doesn't come across as cruel. He comes across as competent. He's the rare Imperial you respect, even as you fear him. Because you know he's playing chess while everyone else is still arguing about checkers. The most fascinating thing about Thrawn is what his story reveals about Star Wars itself. Because if you accept that he's a patriot rather than a villain, then the entire moral framework of the saga gets complicated. Suddenly, it's not about good rebels versus evil Imperials. It's about perspective. And perspective is dangerous because it makes you question who the real villains are. Think about it. To the Chiss ascendancy. Thrawn is a hero who sacrificed everything to defend them. To the rebels, he's a monster who crushed their fleets with terrifying precision. Both views are correct. And that ambiguity forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that morality in Star Wars isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's blue and grey. This is what makes Thrawn so different from someone like Darth Vader. Vader's story is about redemption from evil. Thrawn's story isn't about redemption at all. Because he doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as dutiful. That means you can't redeem him the way you redeem Vader, because he doesn't think he needs redemption. He thinks he's right. and that's a far scarier kind of antagonist. And it's why Thrawn's role in modern Star Wars is so important. The galaxy is used to cartoonish villains who cackle about domination. But Thrawn challenges the audience to think about what loyalty, duty, and survival actually look like. He forces us to see that sometimes the villain is just someone fighting for a different side, someone whose goals aren't cruel but simply clash with ours. The unknown regions loom over his story like a shadow. We still don't know the full threats lurking out there, but we know Thrawn does. He acts the way he does because he believes only ruthless preparation can shield the galaxy from what's coming. And if he's right, then suddenly his ruthlessness looks a lot more like wisdom than cruelty. That's what makes him one of the most compelling characters in all of Star Wars. He forces us to stop and reconsider our own assumptions. If loyalty and patriotism can look like villainy from the outside, what does that say about the way we judge history? What does it say about the way empires justify themselves? Thrawn blurs every line. And this isn't just theoretical. In real history, patriots for one nation are often villains to another. Heroes in one culture are monsters in another. Thrawn embodies that dynamic perfectly. He's a mirror held up to Star Wars fans, forcing us to admit that morality depends on perspective, and that the neat boxes of good and evil don't always fit. This is why Thrawn endures as a fan favourite, even though he loses. Because he isn't a villain you hate. He's a figure you respect, maybe even admire. He complicates the saga instead of simplifying it. And in a franchise that often falls back on binary morality, that complication is refreshing. Thrawn isn't scary because he's evil. He's scary because he's competent. He's frightening because he's loyal. And he's unforgettable because he's right, at least from his point of view. That's not a villain. That's a patriot. And that's why he stands apart from every other Imperial officer in Star Wars.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.